Welcome to Border Life. This week it's an arty edition. We meet a Galloway lad who became a sculptor, literally overnight.
I made a piece for my grandmother in quite a prominent position, just for fun, and people would knock at our door and ask about it, stop her in the street and ask about it. So I made another one and drove it from Wigtown up to the Royal Highland Show, and at the end of a week at the Royal Highland Show I had a year's work ahead of me.
Marking boundaries and sheltering animals, there's a rugged beauty to the Galloway dry stone dyke. But stone can also be used for much more genteel work. Like the stunning creations of sculptor James Parker, who draws on agricultural roots.
My father was a farmer just outside Monreath in the Machers, and one of my earliest memories, not just of working with stone, but my earliest memories was working with my father, helping repair dry stone walls on the farm. And I'd probably be about 4 or 5 years old at the time. Working with stone, you always feel as though you've done a good day's work when you go home, and yeah, there is something special about it.
The tools of his trade, hammer and chisel, are a world away from his early career. As an RAF engineer, he worked with complex Tornado aircraft engines, spending lots of time overseas with his squadron. But the call of home was strong for this Galloway boy.
I went back to occasionally milking cows, and between milkings I would go out repair dry stone walls. I found that I really enjoyed it, and the Enquiries came in so quickly that I very quickly became a full-time dry stone waller, and that was the case for about maybe a year, and then I started getting a bit more creative, building patterns and things into walls.
When did you first get involved with slate then?
The opportunity to work with slate first came to me when I was driving home from work, and for 2 or 3 days I'd noticed that some roofers on a farm were taking slates off a roof and replacing it with corrugated iron, and I'd always fancied working with slate, you know, because it's so thin. The possibility of being really precise was there. So I stopped and asked the farmer if I could have some of the slates, and he thought I was completely bonkers, said it was useless. I made a piece for my grandmother in quite a prominent position, just for fun. She loved it, and people would knock at our door and ask about it, stop her in the street and ask about it. And so I thought, there's got to be something in this. So I made another one, a completely dry stone sculpture, wrapped it up very carefully and drove it from Wigtown up to the Royal Highland Show with the idea that the more people that saw it, the better. And at the end of a week at the Royal Highland Show, I had a year's work ahead of me. So I was never really a part-time sculptor. I just went from dry stone walling to full-time sculptor, so I do feel very lucky that that's what's happened. And this is the space that we get to build a stand out of. People ask, do we arrive?
Along the way, he's also picked up thousands of followers online as he shares secrets of his craft and takes supporters behind the scenes of international trips.
On the Saturday of Chelsea, just before the great plant sell-off begins, and what happens is a big bell rings and
James has become a regular at Chelsea Flower Show, gaining commissions from all over the world, leading to some interesting transport challenges, with pieces shipped to Australia, Canada and the USA.
Yeah, you do have a few sleepless nights when things are travelling either by ocean freight or air freight across to the States. It's quite a long trip, and you want things to arrive safely, so we're quite well practiced at that, and fortunately we've never had any problems. A lot of people think that it's, if you look at it the wrong way, it'll break unpredictably, but you can be very precise with it. I like the fact that every piece of slate is different, and I think that shows up in the finished sculptures. Each sculpture has its own character. and a very subtle difference can make quite a large difference to the finished piece. So I like the fact that it's never quite the same. The apples and pears comes from Vermont in the States. It's similar geology to Welsh slate. Millions of years ago, the Wales and the eastern seaboard in the States would have been joined together. So the green slate would come from Vermont, red slate from New York, and I probably use about half of my slate still from the Lake District and from Wales. So the grey slate, grey-blue slate comes from the Lake District along with Westmoreland, and the heather coloured slate and some of the greys come from Wales.
As well as your slate work, you're now becoming very well known for the bronze work. So how did you move into that?
It was just a natural progression, really. I think when you're working with slate all the time, it's the texture. You know, the texture has such a lot to do with the finished piece. From a distance, you see the entire form, and the texture draws you closer. And for completely the opposite reasons, I've been attracted to working with bronze, trying to, well, obviously begin with clay or plaster or any other medium, but you're trying to create something really perfect, something that's totally smooth, and it's all about the form.
James followed his wife north and now has a workshop overlooking the east coast rather than the west.
To my 4 siblings and I, the neat little pine cones which littered the floor.
But his most recent and most challenging work in bronze is still inspired by his Galloway childhood. Once again, a rural fascination. Pine cones.
I think I've got quite a mathematical brain, and certainly when it came to creating the pine cone, I think that's why the challenge sort of appeals to me, and I might think about things for a long time before I pick them up and have a real concerted effort at them, but usually by the time I've decided that I'm going to work on a piece, I've considered it for long enough that I kind of know where I'm going with it. I always feel a bit uncomfortable calling myself an artist, but I guess that's what I am. But it's always a bit like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder, really. You know, I'm certainly not a stonemason. I've had no stonemasonry training whatsoever. Well, I guess it's the same with my sculpture. No training at all, other than the fundamentals that my dad taught me dry stone walling 40 years ago.